An experienced crane operator was assigned to work on the construction of an 80-story skyscraper, considered the most ambitious and dangerous project in the country. What he lived through during months of construction revealed criminal negligence, inhuman pressure on workers, and a suicidal race against time that cost workers lives. Fatal winds, defective equipment, and supervisors who ignored all safety protocols transformed the construction site into a battlefield where only the bravest survived. This is the real story of how corporate ambition can become a death sentence for ordinary workers. Leave in the comments, would you have the courage to work in such extreme conditions to support your family? Chapter 1. Marcus Thompson had been operating tower cranes for 17 years, but he had never been offered a contract as lucrative or as dangerous as the Sky Tower project. At 39 years old, he was considered one of the most skilled and reliable crane operators in the region, with expertise in the complex high-rise construction that required both technical precision and nerves of steel. Living in a modest two-story house with his wife Linda, whom he had married 14 years ago, and their two teenage children, 16-year-old Jake and 14-year-old Emma, Marcus had built a comfortable middle-class life through his expertise with the massive machines that made modern skyscraper construction possible. Marcus's reputation was built on his ability to operate cranes safely and efficiently in challenging conditions that would intimidate less experienced operators. He had worked on some of the tallest buildings in the region, developing skills that allowed him to handle heavy loads with precision even in high winds and difficult weather conditions that forced other operators to shut down. The call for the Sky Tower project came through his longtime employer, Apex Construction Services, a company that specialized in providing skilled operators for major high-rise construction projects. The scope of work was both impressive and intimidating, operating the primary tower crane for an 80-story mixed-use skyscraper that would be the tallest building in the country when completed. "Marcus," explained Steve Wilson, Apex's operations manager, during their initial meeting, "this is the opportunity of a lifetime. The Sky Tower project will establish whoever works on it as the premier crane operator for mega construction projects. The pay is extraordinary, but the demands will be unlike anything you've experienced." The Sky Tower was being developed by Pinnacle Development Corporation, a company with a reputation for aggressive timelines and cost-cutting measures that had resulted in both spectacular successes and controversial construction practices. The project had already generated significant media attention due to its ambitious design and the compressed construction schedule that called for completion in just 18 months. "The timeline is extremely aggressive," Steve warned as he reviewed the project specifications with Marcus. "Pinnacle wants this building topped out in 14 months, which means we'll be working in weather conditions and circumstances that would normally shut down construction. They're paying premium rates because they need operators who can handle extreme conditions." Marcus studied the project plans and crane specifications, noting that the work would require operating at heights and in wind conditions that approached the limits of safe crane operation. The tower crane he would be operating was one of the largest models available, capable of lifting massive loads to heights that few operators ever experienced. But Marcus also noticed that the project specifications included overtime requirements and weather operating parameters that seemed to prioritize schedule adherence over the safety protocols that had kept him alive during 17 years of high-risk construction work. "Steve, some of these operating conditions are beyond what most crane manufacturers recommend for safe operation. Are we sure that Pinnacle understands the risks involved in pushing equipment and operators to these limits?" Steve's response was both reassuring and troubling. "Marcus, Pinnacle has worked with the best engineering firms to design safe operating procedures for extreme conditions. They understand that the Sky Tower requires pushing boundaries, but they've invested in the best equipment and safety systems available. Marcus accepted the contract, motivated by both the substantial pay increase and the professional prestige of working on the most ambitious construction project in the country. The money would allow him to pay off the family's mortgage and establish college funds for Jake and Emma, while the experience would establish him as one of the premier crane operators for mega construction projects. During his preparation for the Sky Tower project, Marcus had been studying advanced construction techniques and business development through professional development materials that emphasize both technical excellence and safety consciousness in high-risk construction work. The Tedswood working guides he had been reviewing included comprehensive sections on professional responsibility and the importance of maintaining safety standards even under pressure from clients or employers who wanted to compromise those standards. Marcus's first weeks on the Sky Tower proceeded according to the aggressive schedule that Pinnacle had established. The crane operations required precision and expertise that tested his skills, but his years of experience with high-rise construction allowed him to execute even the most challenging lifts safely and efficiently. But it was during his fourth week on the project that Marcus began to notice operational pressures and safety compromises that made him question whether the Sky Tower was being built according to the standards that should govern such a dangerous and complex construction project. The project supervisors were pushing crane operations in weather conditions that Marcus knew exceeded safe operating parameters. Wind speeds that should have triggered work stoppages were being ignored in favor of maintaining construction schedules that Pinnacle had promised to investors and city officials. When Marcus raised concerns about operating in dangerous wind conditions, the response from project management was both dismissive and financially threatening. "Marcus, we're paying you premium rates because you're supposed to be able to handle challenging conditions that would stop other operators. If you're not comfortable with the demands of this project, we can find someone who is." But Marcus's experience with crane operations told him that some of the conditions he was being asked to work in were not just challenging, but potentially catastrophic. Operating a tower crane in high winds with heavy loads was a delicate balance between physics and human judgment, and the margin for error decreased dramatically when weather conditions exceeded design parameters. Marcus began to understand that the Sky Tower project was being driven by financial pressures and public relations commitments that took priority over the safety considerations that should govern high-risk construction work. Pinnacle had committed to completion deadlines that could only be met by ignoring safety protocols and pushing equipment and workers beyond their safe operating limits. The implications were staggering. If Marcus's analysis was correct, the Sky Tower construction site was becoming a place where catastrophic accidents were not just possible, but inevitable, given the systematic disregard for safety standards that governed crane operations at extreme heights. That evening, Marcus returned home with concerns that kept him awake long into the night. Over dinner with Linda and the children, he found himself thinking about the other crane operators and construction workers who were facing the same dangerous conditions, and about the families who were counting on them to come home safely every day. "Marcus, you look worried," Linda observed as they put Jake and Emma to bed. "Is there something dangerous about the new project?" Marcus hesitated before answering, knowing that sharing his concerns might worry his family, but also understanding that the financial security the Sky Tower contract provided was crucial to their future plans. "The project is pushing all of us to work in conditions that are more dangerous than anything I've experienced before," Marcus said carefully. "But the money is too good to walk away from, and walking away might mean not getting similar opportunities in the future." Linda knew her husband well enough to understand that his concerns were based on professional expertise rather than general anxiety about a challenging project. "Marcus, no amount of money is worth risking your life. We'll find other ways to pay for the kids' college and the mortgage." But Marcus also understood that walking away from the Sky Tower project might not just affect his own career, but could damage his reputation in an industry where reliability and courage under pressure were essential to long-term success. The decision about whether to continue working on the Sky Tower project, despite the dangerous conditions, would test every principle Marcus had developed during his 17 years as a crane operator. But it would also force him to choose between financial security and the safety protocols that had kept him alive throughout his career in high-risk construction work. Chapter 2. Marcus's decision to continue working on the Sky Tower project despite his safety concerns was motivated by both financial necessity and his professional reputation in an industry where operators who gained reputations for being difficult often found themselves excluded from the most lucrative contracts. But as construction progressed into the building's upper floors, the dangerous conditions that Marcus had identified during his first month became not just concerning, but actively life-threatening for everyone working on the project. The tower crane operations were being pushed far beyond manufacturer specifications, with Marcus frequently required to operate in wind conditions that exceeded safe parameters by significant margins. The loads he was lifting had also increased beyond the crane's rated capacity, justified by project engineers who claimed that dynamic load calculations allowed for heavier lifts than the manufacturer's conservative specifications. Most disturbing was the discovery that other crane operators working on the Sky Tower had expressed similar concerns about dangerous operating conditions, but had been threatened with immediate termination and industry blacklisting if they refused to comply with Pinnacle's aggressive construction schedule. Tony Martinez, an experienced operator working on the project's secondary crane, shared his observations with Marcus during a brief break between shifts. "Marcus, they're pushing us to operate these machines in ways that violate every safety standard I've learned in 20 years of crane work. Yesterday, they had me lifting a load in winds that were gusting to 50 miles per hour, 30 miles per hour above what the manufacturer says is safe for that weight." Maria Santos, a veteran construction worker responsible for rigging loads for crane operations, had been systematically prevented from conducting the thorough safety inspections that such dangerous lifts required. "They've shortened inspection times and eliminated safety procedures to maintain the schedule," Maria explained during a discreet conversation with Marcus. "When I try to document safety violations, my reports are either ignored or disappear from the project files." Marcus realized that the Sky Tower project was being constructed through a systematic pattern of safety violations that affected not just crane operations, but every aspect of the high-risk construction work required to build an 80-story skyscraper. The scope of the safety compromises suggested that Pinnacle Development Corporation was deliberately accepting the risk of catastrophic accidents in order to meet construction deadlines that had been established for financial and political reasons rather than engineering and safety considerations. But Marcus also discovered that the dangerous working conditions were being hidden from regulatory agencies and safety inspectors through falsified records and coordinated efforts to present a facade of compliance during official visits to the construction site. OSHA inspectors were given advance notice of their visits, allowing Pinnacle to temporarily implement proper safety procedures and hide evidence of the systematic violations that characterized normal operations on the Sky Tower project. Marcus's documentation of these practices revealed that the Sky Tower construction site was not just dangerous, but was being operated in deliberate violation of federal safety regulations that were designed to prevent exactly the kind of catastrophic accidents that the project's aggressive schedule was making inevitable. During this period of increasing danger and moral conflict, Marcus found himself relying on principles of professional integrity and worker safety that he had developed throughout his career operating in high-risk construction environments. The professional development materials he had been studying emphasized the importance of skilled operators maintaining safety standards even when faced with pressure from employers or clients who wanted to compromise those standards for financial gain. The contrast between the ethical operating practices outlined in his studies and the systematic safety violations he was witnessing at the Sky Tower reinforced Marcus's understanding that he was participating in a project that was likely to result in serious injuries or deaths. But Marcus also understood that simply walking away from the project would not protect the other workers who would continue to face dangerous conditions and might not even protect him from retaliation by a company that had demonstrated its willingness to threaten and intimidate workers who questioned its practices. The crisis came on a Thursday morning during the 13th week of construction, when Marcus was required to operate his crane in weather conditions that exceeded every safety parameter he had learned during his 17 years of experience. Wind gusts were approaching 60 miles per hour, well above the 30-mile-per-hour limit that the crane manufacturer specified for safe operation with the heavy concrete panels that Marcus was lifting to the building's 70th floor. The loads themselves were also heavier than standard specifications, requiring Marcus to operate at the very limits of the crane's lifting capacity. When Marcus requested permission to shut down operations until wind conditions improved, he was told by project supervisor Richard Blake that stopping work would result in immediate termination and forfeiture of all accumulated overtime pay. "Marcus, we're behind schedule and we can't afford weather delays." These crane specifications include safety margins that allow for operation in more challenging conditions than the manufacturer admits. You're being paid to handle difficult conditions that would stop other operators. But Marcus knew that operating in the current weather conditions with overweight loads was not just challenging, it was potentially catastrophic. The combination of high winds and heavy loads created stress on the crane that could result in structural failure, tipping, or loss of load control that could kill not just Marcus, but anyone working below the crane's operational area. The decision Marcus faced that morning would determine not just his own fate, but potentially the lives of dozens of other workers who were depending on his professional judgment and expertise to operate the crane safely, despite the extreme conditions and management pressure. As Marcus climbed into the crane cab at a height of nearly 800 feet above the ground, with winds that were shaking the massive machine and loads that approached the limits of its capacity, he understood that he was about to face the most dangerous and morally challenging situation of his career. The city spread out below him, visible through the storm clouds that were generating the dangerous wind conditions. Somewhere in that city, Linda and the children were going about their normal routines, trusting that he would make the decisions necessary to come home safely to them that evening. But Marcus also understood that the other workers on the Sky Tower project were counting on him to operate his crane with the skill and judgment that would protect their lives, even if that meant defying the management pressure that prioritized construction schedules over human safety. What do you think about Marcus's situation? Should he have refused to operate in such dangerous conditions despite the threats to his job and income? Or do you understand why financial pressure made him consider taking risks that he knew were potentially fatal? Leave your opinion in the comments about how you would handle being forced to choose between safety and employment. Chapter 3. Marcus's decision to operate the crane, despite the dangerous weather conditions, was made with the understanding that refusing could end his career in crane operation, but proceeding could end his life or the lives of the workers below who depended on his skill and judgment to keep them safe. As he began the lift of a massive concrete panel in wind conditions that exceeded all safety parameters, Marcus felt the crane responding to wind forces that pushed the machine beyond its designed operating envelope. The tower crane swayed in ways that Marcus had never experienced, and the load oscillated dangerously as wind gusts caught the concrete panel like a sail. Through precise control and 17 years of experience reading wind patterns and crane behavior, Marcus managed to complete the lift successfully, but he also understood that he had come dangerously close to losing control of both the crane and the load in ways that could have been catastrophic. The incident was reported to project management as a successful completion of scheduled work, but Marcus knew that he had witnessed firsthand how the Sky Tower project was systematically pushing equipment and operators beyond safe limits in pursuit of construction deadlines that prioritize profits over lives. Over the next several weeks, Marcus continued to operate in conditions that grew progressively more dangerous as Pinnacle's deadline pressure intensified and weather conditions worsened with the changing season. Each day brought new challenges that tested not just his technical skills, but his moral resolve to continue participating in a project that he knew was likely to result in serious injuries or deaths. The first fatality came on a Tuesday morning during the 15th week of construction. James Parker, a 26-year-old ironworker, fell to his death from the 72nd floor when safety equipment failed during a routine steel installation procedure. The equipment failure was later attributed to modifications that had been made to speed up installation procedures, but the official investigation was limited, and James's death was classified as an industrial accident rather than a preventable tragedy caused by systematic safety violations. Marcus attended James's funeral, where he met the young man's wife and infant daughter, who would grow up without a father because Pinnacle Development Corporation had valued construction schedules more than worker safety. The second fatality occurred just 3 weeks later, when crane operator Tony Martinez lost control of his crane during a windstorm that exceeded safe operating conditions. Tony had requested permission to shut down operations, but had been threatened with termination if he stopped working. The resulting accident killed Tony and 2 other workers when the crane's load broke free and crashed into the building's structure. Marcus realized that he was witnessing the systematic destruction of human lives in pursuit of corporate profits, and that his continued participation in the project was making him complicit in a pattern of preventable deaths that resulted from deliberate safety violations. But Marcus also discovered that Pinnacle Development Corporation was actively covering up the true causes of the accidents through falsified reports, intimidation of witnesses, and coordination with regulatory officials who were either incompetent or corrupt. The official investigation of Tony Martinez's death concluded that the accident was caused by operator error, rather than the dangerous weather conditions that Pinnacle had forced him to work in. Tony's family was denied workers' compensation benefits, and other operators were warned that discussing the circumstances of his death could result in legal action for defamation and interference with business operations. Marcus understood that the Sky Tower project had become a place where workers' lives were systematically sacrificed to corporate ambition, and where the truth about those deaths was being deliberately hidden to protect the people responsible for creating the dangerous conditions. The pattern of accidents and cover-ups continued throughout Marcus's time on the project, with at least 6 other workers dying in incidents that could have been prevented if Pinnacle had prioritized safety over schedule adherence and profit maximization. Each death was attributed to human error, equipment malfunction, or unforeseeable circumstances, while the systematic safety violations that created the conditions for these accidents remained hidden from regulatory agencies and public scrutiny. Marcus began secretly documenting the dangerous conditions and safety violations he witnessed, understanding that he might be the only person in a position to provide evidence of the criminal negligence that was killing his fellow workers. The documentation Marcus gathered included photographs of damaged equipment being used beyond safe limits, recordings of supervisors ordering workers to ignore safety protocols, and detailed technical analysis of the crane operations that were being conducted in violation of manufacturer specifications and federal safety regulations. Call to action. But Marcus also realized that his position as a crane operator made him vulnerable to the same retaliation and safety compromises that had killed other workers on the project. If he had developed the kind of independent business that systems like Ted's Woodworking could provide to skilled professionals, he might have had the financial freedom to walk away from dangerous projects like the Sky Tower without sacrificing his family's financial security. Instead of being trapped in life-threatening situations because he needed specific contracts, he could have built his own client base of verified, ethical customers who valued both quality work and worker safety above profit margins. If you're a skilled construction professional who wants the independence to choose only projects that maintain proper safety standards, discover how Ted's Woodworking can help you build a thriving business on your own terms. Click here to learn how thousands of professionals have achieved true freedom from companies that treat workers as expendable. Marcus's documentation revealed that the Sky Tower project was not an isolated case of corporate negligence, but part of a broader pattern of construction industry practices that systematically prioritized profits over worker safety and human life. The evidence he gathered would eventually prove crucial to exposing not just the specific criminal negligence at the Sky Tower project, but the industry-wide practices that made such tragedies inevitable when companies were allowed to operate without meaningful oversight or accountability. But Marcus's investigation was taking place under conditions of extreme danger, as his continued work on the project required him to operate equipment in conditions that could kill him at any moment, while his documentation efforts put him at risk of retaliation from people who had already demonstrated their willingness to sacrifice human lives to protect their profits. The breaking point came on a Friday morning during the 19th week of construction, when Marcus was ordered to operate his crane in weather conditions that were the most dangerous he had ever encountered in his 17-year career. Thank you so much for staying with us this far in this incredible story. We truly appreciate your dedication as a viewer, and believe me, the best is yet to come. What follows will show us how Marcus faced the ultimate test of his courage and skill in conditions that would challenge every principle he had learned about crane operation and worker safety. Chapter 4. The storm that hit the Sky Tower construction site on that Friday morning was unlike anything Marcus had experienced in his 17 years of crane operation. Wind gusts exceeded 70 miles per hour, more than double the safe operating limit for the loads he was being ordered to lift, while lightning and rain created visibility and electrical hazards that should have shut down all high-altitude construction work immediately. But Pinnacle Development Corporation was facing a critical deadline that would determine the release of millions of dollars in construction financing, and project management made the decision to continue operations despite weather conditions that violated every safety protocol that governed crane operations. Richard Blake, the project supervisor who had threatened Marcus with termination for previous safety concerns, approached him with orders that Marcus knew could be a death sentence for himself and every worker in the crane's operational area. "Marcus, we need to complete the concrete pours for floors 75 through 78 today, regardless of weather conditions. The financing deadline is Monday, and we can't afford any delays that would jeopardize the project's funding." Marcus stared at Blake in disbelief, Richard, the wind speeds are approaching hurricane force. Operating the crane in these conditions with concrete loads could result in complete loss of control. People will die if we attempt these lifts. Marcus, you're being paid to handle challenging conditions that would stop other operators. If you're not willing to do the job you're being paid for, we'll find someone who is. But Marcus understood that Blake's threat was empty. No competent crane operator would agree to work in the current conditions, and Blake knew that replacing Marcus would require shutting down crane operations for several days, while a new operator familiarized himself with the equipment and site conditions. The real pressure was coming from Pinnacle's executives, who were willing to risk the lives of construction workers to meet financial deadlines that affected their personal wealth and corporate reputation. Marcus climbed into his crane cab, knowing that he was about to face the most dangerous operating conditions of his career, with loads that approached the crane's maximum capacity and weather that exceeded every safety parameter he had learned to respect during his years of high-risk construction work. The first lift proceeded successfully despite wind forces that shook the crane violently and caused the concrete load to oscillate dangerously as it was raised to the 75th floor. Marcus's skill and experience allowed him to maintain control of both the crane and the load, but he also understood that he was operating at the very edge of what was physically possible. The second lift was more challenging, as wind conditions worsened and the concrete panel began oscillating in ways that threatened to overload the crane's structural capacity. Marcus managed to complete the lift safely, but only through precise timing and anticipation of wind patterns that required every skill he had developed during his career. It was during the third lift that the inevitable disaster occurred. A wind gust that exceeded 80 miles per hour caught the concrete panel at the worst possible moment, creating forces that overwhelmed the crane's ability to maintain stability and control. Marcus felt the tower crane begin to tip as the combination of wind force and load dynamics exceeded the machine's designed operating envelope. In the seconds that followed, Marcus used every technique he had learned to attempt to regain control. But the physics of the situation had moved beyond human ability to manage. The crane's collapse was both sudden and catastrophic. The massive machine toppled sideways, carrying Marcus and his cab toward the ground, while the concrete load broke free and crashed into the building's structure, causing secondary collapses that affected multiple floors of the partially completed skyscraper. Marcus survived the crane's collapse through a combination of safety equipment, skill, and extraordinary luck. But he was critically injured and trapped in the wreckage of his cab, nearly 800 feet above the ground. The rescue operation required hours of dangerous work by emergency responders who risked their own lives to reach him. But the human cost of the disaster extended far beyond Marcus's injuries. The crane's collapse and the secondary structural failures it caused killed 17 workers and injured 43 others, making it one of the deadliest construction accidents in the country's history. Among the dead were workers Marcus had known for months, people with families and dreams who had trusted their safety to a company that valued profits more than human life. The youngest victim was 19-year-old Kevin Walsh, an apprentice electrician who had been working to save money for college when he was killed by falling debris from the crane collapse. As Marcus was hospitalized with multiple fractures and internal injuries, he watched news coverage of the disaster that portrayed the accident as an unforeseeable tragedy caused by extreme weather conditions, rather than the systematic safety violations that had made the catastrophe inevitable. Pinnacle Development Corporation's public statements emphasized the unpredictable nature of construction work and the heroic efforts of emergency responders, while avoiding any acknowledgement of the company's role in creating the dangerous conditions that had caused the disaster. But Marcus knew the truth about what had caused the crane collapse and the deaths of 17 of his fellow workers. The disaster had not been caused by unforeseeable weather or equipment failure, but by corporate decisions that prioritized financial deadlines over the safety protocols that existed to prevent exactly this kind of tragedy. From his hospital bed, Marcus made the decision that would define the rest of his life. He would ensure that the truth about the Sky Tower disaster was exposed, regardless of the personal and professional consequences he might face for challenging one of the most powerful construction companies in the country. Chapter 5. Marcus's recovery from the injuries he sustained in the crane collapse took 8 months of surgeries, physical therapy, and psychological counseling to address the trauma of surviving a disaster that had killed 17 of his fellow workers. But even as he fought to regain his physical abilities, Marcus was also fighting a more important battle to ensure that the truth about the Sky Tower disaster was exposed and that the people responsible for the preventable deaths were held accountable. Pinnacle Development Corporation had immediately launched a campaign to control the narrative about the disaster, hiring teams of lawyers, public relations specialists, and technical experts to argue that the crane collapse had been caused by unprecedented weather conditions that no reasonable company could have foreseen or prevented. The company's initial investigation blamed the disaster on equipment failure and operator error, suggesting that Marcus had made critical mistakes in crane operation that contributed to the collapse. This narrative was designed to shift responsibility away from the systematic safety violations that Marcus knew had made the disaster inevitable. But Marcus had saved copies of the documentation he had gathered during his months working on the Sky Tower project, including photographs, recordings, and technical analysis that proved the crane collapse had been caused by systematic violations of safety protocols rather than unforeseeable circumstances or operator error. Working with investigative journalist Robert Chen and a team of construction safety experts, Marcus began building a case that would expose not just the specific negligence that had caused the Sky Tower disaster, but the broader pattern of construction industry practices that routinely sacrificed worker safety for corporate profits. The evidence Marcus provided was both technically devastating and emotionally powerful. His documentation showed that Pinnacle had systematically ignored manufacturer specifications, weather safety protocols, and federal regulations in pursuit of construction deadlines that were established for financial rather than engineering reasons. Most importantly, Marcus's testimony revealed that the dangerous conditions at Sky Tower were not the result of isolated bad decisions, but represented standard operating procedures for a company that viewed worker deaths as an acceptable cost of doing business. These weren't accidents, Marcus said during his testimony before congressional investigators. These were predictable results of corporate policies that treated construction workers as expendable resources rather than human beings whose lives had value. The federal investigation that resulted from Marcus's evidence led to criminal charges against 12 Pinnacle executives and supervisors, including manslaughter charges for the deaths that had resulted from their systematic disregard for worker safety. Richard Blake, the supervisor who had threatened Marcus with termination for raising safety concerns, was convicted of criminal negligence and sentenced to 15 years in federal prison. Pinnacle's CEO received a 25-year sentence for conspiracy and reckless endangerment charges related to the company's systematic pattern of safety violations. But perhaps most importantly, Marcus's case led to comprehensive reforms in construction safety oversight and corporate accountability for worker deaths. New federal regulations required independent safety monitoring for high-risk construction projects, while stronger penalties for safety violations created real deterrence to the kind of negligence that had caused the Sky Tower disaster. The personal cost to Marcus and his family was substantial. His injuries ended his career as a crane operator, and the legal battle with Pinnacle consumed years of his life and created ongoing stress for Linda and the children. But the financial settlements from civil lawsuits provided the family with financial security that allowed Marcus to rebuild his life around new purposes and opportunities. Marcus established Thompson Construction Safety Consulting, a firm specializing in safety oversight and accident prevention for high-risk construction projects. His expertise in identifying dangerous practices and his proven commitment to worker safety made him a valuable consultant for companies and government agencies that wanted to prevent tragedies like the Sky Tower disaster. The advanced business principles that Marcus had been developing through his professional studies proved crucial to building a successful consulting practice that combined technical expertise with genuine service to worker safety and public welfare. The Ted's Wood working guides that Marcus had been studying included comprehensive business development strategies that helped him transition from employee to independent consultant serving clients who valued both technical competence and proven integrity. Within 3 years of establishing his consulting firm, Marcus had grown the business to employ 12 specialists who conducted safety audits and accident prevention services for construction projects throughout the country. The business success exceeded anything Marcus had achieved as a crane operator, proving that professionals who maintained their integrity while serving important public purposes could build careers that were both financially rewarding and personally meaningful. Linda had become an advocate for construction worker families affected by industrial accidents, helping other spouses and children understand and cope with the unique challenges that resulted from workplace injuries and the loss of family members to preventable industrial disasters. "What we went through changed our entire family," Linda said during a television interview about construction safety reform. "But we also learned that tragedy can become purpose when people like my husband have the courage to fight for changes that protect other families from experiencing the same losses." Jake and Emma, now 20 and 18 years old, often spoke about how their father's survival and subsequent advocacy had taught them the importance of standing up for people who couldn't protect themselves. "My dad could have just taken his settlement money and tried to forget about what happened," Jake said during a college presentation about workplace safety. "But he chose to use his experience to prevent other families from losing fathers and sons to corporate negligence." The Sky Tower project itself had been permanently halted after the crane collapse, and the partially completed structure had been demolished due to structural damage caused by the disaster. The site was eventually converted into a memorial park, honoring the 17 workers who had died, and the dozens of others who had been injured in what became known as one of the most preventable industrial disasters in construction history. Marcus often visited the memorial park, where each victim was honored with a plaque that included their name, age, and details about their families and dreams. These plaques served as daily reminders of why his work to prevent construction accidents was more than just a business. It was a mission to honor the memory of people who had died because others had failed in their duty to protect them. Standing in the memorial park, Marcus often reflected on how his survival of the Sky Tower disaster had led to changes that would protect countless construction workers for decades to come. The safety regulations and oversight procedures that had resulted from his testimony were preventing accidents and saving lives on construction sites throughout the country. The federal prosecutors who had handled the Sky Tower case still consulted with Marcus occasionally when new construction safety cases arose. His expertise in identifying dangerous practices and his reputation for integrity had made him a trusted resource for law enforcement agencies investigating industrial accidents and corporate negligence. "Mr. Thompson," one prosecutor had told him during a recent consultation, "your case changed how we investigate construction accidents and corporate responsibility for worker safety. You proved that skilled workers who survive disasters can become powerful advocates for preventing future tragedies. And in his consulting office each evening, surrounded by the safety protocols and accident prevention systems that his work had helped establish, Marcus continued to build, not just consulting services and oversight systems, but a legacy of proving that construction workers who refuse to accept dangerous conditions can achieve both professional success and genuine contribution to the safety of their fellow workers. The crane operator who had survived the country's most dangerous construction site had become the safety consultant who helped ensure that corporate ambition would never again be allowed to override the basic human right of workers to return home safely to their families each day. This story shows us how corporate greed can transform ambitious projects into death traps for honest workers. Marcus proved that even in the most extreme conditions, courage and integrity can prevail over negligence and blind ambition. Sometimes surviving means finding the strength to fight, not just for our own lives, but for the colleagues who depend on us. What would you do if forced to work in such dangerous conditions? Tell us in the comments if you would have the same determination as Marcus. If this story impressed you, subscribe to the channel and activate the notification bell for more emotional, real stories. And don't miss the next video with another story that will leave you speechless.